is Nikola, and I'm an AL developer. And one of the areas that I'm working on is the cloud migration. The next area that I'm also working on is the upgrade. So I'll be covering this part today. Today with me I have Roman.
Yes, hello, my name is Roman Sauber. I'm the engineering manager of the control plane team. We are part of the Business Central platform and are responsible for the services that manage Business Central environments in the cloud for administration and, among many other things, also for cloud migration, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah, hello, my name is Julia, and I'm a developer in Business Central, and before I was a developer in Navision, so worked in many areas, and today I'm responsible for cloud migration replication engine. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So we have prepared a lot of content in front of you. We are going to start with the journey overview. So I'm going to describe to you how does the cloud migration journey looks end to end. So you get an overview of all of the components that are in play. Then I'm going to show you all of the steps that you need to do to prepare for the cloud migration journey. So all of the things that you should do before you start replicating data into SaaS. Then Roman is going to do the demo how you can set up the cloud migration, and he's also going to go deep into the technical details. And Julia is going to describe to you how is the tool actually moving the data to the SaaS database. During this part, they're also going to cover most commonly occurring errors. They're also going to show you how you can fix them so you get a more smoother cloud migration journey. We are going to end with upgrade. So I'm going to demo to you the improvements that we did to the cloud migration from previous versions. So we have implemented some nice functionality there. And we have also improved the on-prem upgrade. So we have few changes that I believe that you would really like at the end. We will not have time to go into details for the API, so I will just briefly mention it at the end. So if we are to start the cloud migration journey, the first stop would be actually the version 14. And this is a rather important version because this is the last version which is supporting CIL. As you probably remember, in version 15, we have stopped the support for CIL, so we could develop AAL in an easier way and to give you nice features that we have implemented over time. When we have discontinued the 14, the promise was that you need to upgrade to the other side because the grass is greener at the other end with version 15. And if you have been here 3 years ago on the BC TechDays in 2019, you may remember this slide. So this was the story back then. Today, the journey is looking like this. And as you can see, we have been busy. We have released 6 new releases. And we have added a lot of functionality, so you can see that each release is bigger than the previous release. The good news as well is that the grass is still green. And let's take a look how does the upgrade journey look like. The first step is to upgrade to 14 if you're coming from the previous version. Then you can do a single step upgrade to the version 21, skipping all of the versions in between. And if this is what the customer wants, you can go live on 21, or you can replicate the data to SaaS and go live in SaaS version. This path is bringing benefits because you're able to get more control in the on-prem upgrade, and replication is usually a safer last step than running the upgrade, right? But the problem with this part is that you need to write the upgrade scripts and to do the on-prem upgrade. Alternative part is that you can go to 14, and then you can replicate the data to SaaS. You can go straight to the latest version of the cloud, and then we will run the upgrade in the SaaS version. This part is better because you don't need to do the on-prem upgrade. And the second benefit that you're getting is that the upgrade and cloud replication is going to be a bit more forgiving when it comes to breaking changes. And I will cover it a little bit later. Now, before we go forward, this picture is showing one important thing, which is also one of the questions that we are often getting from you. And that question is, for how long are we going to support the one-step upgrade path from 14 and direct cloud migration from 14? And as you can see, it's a very important build for us because it is serving as a bridge from all of the customers that are on CIL to the latest version. So the answer to this one is, we are going to support this path as long as we technically can, because we want to make you as efficient when you're running the upgrade. Now, there are two technical challenges which are also visible from the picture. As you can see, the longer you wait, the longer time it's going to take to do the upgrade. Because with each functionality that we add, we are also unfortunately adding time to upgrade. We are aware of this problem, and we did few improvements in this release to address this problem, to make the upgrade actually take shorter time. The second problem is that the software on the previous versions before 14 is getting out of support. And in today's world, it's presenting a huge security risk to run your business on a software that is not officially supported anymore. And this is actually one of the main drivers for the cloud migration that we have also heard from you guys, is that the customer wants to go into SaaS, so they do not need to buy the new licenses for SQL Server, Windows, and other products. So this is one of the reasons to prioritize the cloud migration to SaaS. For a few interesting statistical details, in the last 30 days, we had 564 unique customers migrating, and we can see that this number in the last few months was between 500 and 600. And as you can see, the versions 20 and versions 14 are the most popular ones. So approximately 1/3 of the customers is coming from the version 14. And we are, of course, supporting all of the versions between the version 14 all the way up to the version 20. And we plan to do this as long as we can. Now, this was the overview, so I hope that you have understood which steps do we need to take. And now we are going to go into specifics. And we are going to start with step number 1, and that's upgrading to 14. Oops. It works. This died. So as part of the upgrading to 14, there are 2 things that you should do. First one is to align the table definitions and to clean up the data. Aligning the table definitions, this could sound like a big task, but in reality it's relatively simple, because out of all of the properties that we could have on the table objects, these properties are must for both cloud migration and for upgrade. So you must align primary keys both in the source and the target database, and you need to align the field names and data types. If you don't do this, the cloud migration and upgrade is going to fail. Now, following things, cloud migration is able to handle, but if you're running the on-prem upgrade, you're going to be affected. So, if you have different names, if you need to prefix the table name with the 3-letter prefix or suffix, you can use table mapping, and Roman and Julia will show how you can do that. Now, this is a biggest problem that we have heard from you, because almost all of the customers have added additional fields to Microsoft-owned tables. And if you have not refactored them in a good way, the cloud migration is going to ignore these fields currently. So we will replicate the full table, ignoring the fields that you have added to the main table. If you're running upgrade, upgrade is going to fail. Now, the good news is that we understand it's a big problem, and we have a prototype that we are currently testing. So we believe that during the cloud migration, we will be able to split the main table with table extensions into main table and table extension without the need for you to write any code. And if we are successful, we are going to announce it, so just keep your eyes open. There might be an announcement coming in a few weeks. And as the last things is the table IDs and secondary keys. Cloud migration does not care about these at all. They are only important for the on-prem upgrade. So if you are cloud migrating from 14 on an earlier version, you can also change and renumber the objects. For cleaning up the data, we are basically unlimited when it comes to the size of the data that you can cloud migrate, but it's a good idea to clean up the data before you trigger the cloud migration. And if you're going to do something, our ask is to clean up the corrupted code fields. So the corrupted code fields are usually coming from the times before we had a SQL database. So customers were able to enter new line characters, lowercase characters, and other non-printing characters to the code fields. SQL doesn't like it, and this field, if you copy it, you will not be able to see that it has a new line character. You need to detect it with a dedicated SQL query. issue is that if you cloud migrate with these fields, any code modifications, read, delete operation is going to fail. And we are often seeing issues with the loop like this one. So if you do customer find set, and then you loop and modify the customers, when we reach one of these two customers, it is going to fail with the error record does not exist, because platform is unable to read the records with new line characters. To fix it, we have invoked nav sanitize field action. And my recommendation is that you take the copy of the customer database, run it once to identify which tables have the problem, and then you can sanitize their production database even before you start doing the cloud migration. You can optimize them when you know which tables have the problem with dash table ID parameter. And customers are going to be happy because they're most likely experiencing issues with these records on-prem. Company names could have the same problem. They're not going to be covered by the PowerShell commandlet because it's not a code, it's a text field. But the problem is basically the same. You can use a query like this to detect if the company name has a problem. And the issue is that the cloud migration is not going to pick it up, and you need to rename the companies before the cloud migration. Now, for cleaning up the data, you should know all of these reports, but I would recommend that you go to the data archive page because it is listing all of the reports that you can use to compress the entries or to delete the records that are out of date. And it's a good idea to do it before the cloud migration. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Roman for the second part.
Thanks. All right, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the cloud migration under the hood. So on the left-hand side, here we have our source environment, a Business Central on-prem installation with a SQL Server database. On the right-hand side, we have our destination, a Business Central online environment with an Azure SQL database. So we're using Azure Data Factory for cloud migration. And Azure Data Factory is a cloud-based data integration service that allows to copy, move, transform data across various data sources. One of the main concepts of Azure Data Factory are pipelines. And these pipelines are essentially groupings of activities. And these activities copy, move, transform the data, or also orchestrate the flow of data. The third piece here is the integration runtime. This is the compute infrastructure that Azure Data Factory is using. And especially for a case like here, where we have our source in a private network, in an on-prem installation on the customer side, it is a self-hosted integration runtime. And this is installed within the network of the customer on-prem, and then registered with our Azure Data Factory. And in that way, it allows us to do secure copy of the data from on-prem into the cloud, where we then take it further with an Azure integration runtime to copy the data into the destination SQL database. Important to know here that there is no NST needed, no NST running needed. We really connect directly to the database, and the self-hosted integration runtime is also doing only calls to the outside, to the Azure Data Factory that has been linked with. If your source database is in Azure already, then we can use an Azure integration runtime, and then the data goes into the cloud, and from there we follow the same flow copied into our destination database. So the first step to make this work is to do the setup. So if you go in your destination environment to the cloud migration wizard, the setup wizard, you need to provide the information about the SQL server. What are the connection string, and what is your integration runtime that you want to use? We have several Azure Data Factories running, and we use load balancing to find the best one for a particular cloud migration run. And in the first step, we register your integration runtime, we exchange the authentication key, and then these two are linked. Once that is done, we create a preparation pipeline. And this preparation pipeline does a couple of checks. So checks the destination and the source. For example, looking at the compatibility level, looking at the version, do the versions match? And if the checks succeed, then we continue and create a bunch of stored procedures, again on both sides, on the source and on the destination. We also read the list of companies from the source and look at the list of extensions that are installed on the destination. And then based on this information, prepare a list of tables that need to be copied and also how to copy them. With this information then, we create a replication pipeline. And this is then the actual pipeline that is going to do the copy. This pipeline is going to sit there, basically knowing about all the tables, the extensions, what needs to be done, and is ready to run once you actually trigger the replication. So once all of these steps have been done, we mark the environment as ready for migration, and we clean up the preparation pipeline. So we're actually quite excited to see many cloud migrations running over the last month and also years. And we're continuously looking into improving the flow, improving the experience. And as part of that, we are regularly looking at what are the most common errors and failure cases. So I want to give a bit of advice, maybe some tips to avoid these common pitfalls that we see. So one of the things you can imagine is that the user requires certain permissions. If those permissions are missing, we have error messages like these ones here, and it basically points to a couple of things. So one is that the user that is doing the setup in BC has to have the super role. If it's a delegated admin, then there needs to be the customer consent given to run successfully. The SQL user itself also needs a couple of things. So on server level, the sysadmin role, and for the DB owner role. And that allows us to do all the preparations and creations of stored procedures. So user permissions. We also see frequently errors in the connection string. For example, keywords that don't match or parameters missing. And I just pasted here an example link, so it has to be exactly like this, the connection string. We have it also documented in the documentation. And if it's a Azure SQL database, you can find your connection string on the Azure portal, go to the resource, and you can copy it from there. We also see SQL timeouts, which then look like an activity timing out in the Azure Data Factory. And mitigation for that is, so there are certain minimum requirements for the self-hosted integration runtime. One of them is also minimum .NET 4.7.2. And we have seen a couple of database query performance optimizations that help in those steps. So one of them is to update the statistics, the query performance statistics, which you can do by running this stored procedure, and also the indexes. So by reorganizing the indexes, we have seen also performance improvements and avoiding timeout situations. So there's a couple of tips. Also, we post this on the documentation. Have a look there. We also see cases where the product type or the version is not matching, and this shows up as a more generic error message. So pick the current version if the major version, so it's important that the major version is matching here from your source and the destination. Otherwise, pick previous version. And one thing maybe that is also easily missed is there's this property in the tenant database property table, the application version, that needs to be updated manually after an upgrade on-prem. So if that one is missed and doesn't match, then we also see this error. Okay, finally also we see SQL failures to connect. This is typically showing up like this. So we have SQL fail to connect, or some firewall issues, and we recommend to do some essential connection checks before. So verify that the user can connect to the on-prem DB user correct. Check also that the machine that is running the integration runtime has the ability to access the SQL server. You can run a simple query here using the basically a remote execution, and check the connection there. On the firewall level, make sure that the client IP address is whitelisted and has access. So this can be done with this stored procedure. And finally, also the SQL server that's running needs to allow remote access, which you can do with this stored procedure. So once the checks are successful and we have created this replication pipeline, we can actually do the migration and the replication. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Julia.
Thank you, Roman. Right. So you go to start the replication run, you go to Cloud Migration Management page, and there is an action there. So run migration now, and that would start a new migration run. So what does it do? It makes a call to the Azure Data Factory, to your replication pipeline that was stored during the setup. And this replication pipeline starts executing, and it instructs the self-hosted integration runtime to pick the data from the on-premise database and copy it into an Azure blob storage. We use that as a temporary store for the data, and it's regional, so your data is not moving outside of your region. And then the integration runtime in Azure would take the data from the blob storage and move it to the tenant database in the cloud. We do it in 2 steps for a couple of reasons. So one is the performance. The most slow process is the transfer of the data from the on-premise database to the cloud, and self-hosted integration runtime has the ability to compress the data. So this step is actually running faster. Of course, then we have to decompress when we are in the cloud already, but it's faster because we are in Azure. So this is how it runs. And if you have large tables that have to be replicated, then these tables are going through exactly this path. So they're copying one by one through the Azure Blob Storage, and you can watch the progress on the Cloud Migration Management page. If you refresh the status, each large table that has been replicated would show in the statistics there immediately. But for the smaller tables, we introduced an optimization. So we actually collect the data from all the smaller tables. We serialize them into huge JSON, then we compress it, and then we chunk it into the records of a special table. And then just this one table is being replicated, going the same path. And in the Azure side, the stored procedures that are running in the tenant database, they would get these records, again combine a huge JSON, decompress it, and then put the records one by one into the corresponding tables in the tenant database. So if you watch for the status, this process is moving a lot of tables, but you won't see the progress immediately. So you have to wait because we report it by the end when the records are actually in the tenant database. So when you do the replication the first time, we replicate all tables. We call it a full replication run. And then we actually use SQL change tracking versions to make these subsequent runs faster. So if you run replication again, we won't move all the data, but only those that are delta change, so incremental. That would make it faster. We are using change tracking, so it's important that you do not replace or you don't change your on-premise database, otherwise the change tracking becomes invalid. We have to drop it and we have to do the full replication again. And if this happens, you'll see a longer replication run again. So that was for the process. And now, so the replication is done by Azure Data Factory, and it's mostly very stable. We don't see so many errors as in setup. You see it's completely different scale, but like 3 major errors, something happened in the on-premise during the replication run. Or you hit one of the limitations in Azure Data Factory itself. It could be either large metadata or large data. So let's see. For the on-premise intervention, you can have integration runtime is offline, or you can have invalid object name and could not find stored procedure on the SQL level. So for the first one, our recommendation is you keep the machine that hosts your integration runtime online all the time while you're doing cloud migration. So sometimes people shut it down to interrupt, to cancel a replication run. That could be done, no problem. But if you keep it offline too long, then we actually have some automated clean procedures that might just wipe out the whole, all the Azure resources that were associated with your replication. And then you cannot resume it easily. You have to go through the setup again. And for the SQL errors, this is happening when you actually replaced the database. Maybe you restored it from the backup, but you did it before the replication run completed, so it couldn't continue, didn't find the objects. Now, these are the most difficult errors that we face. They are not very common. There are like maybe 10 errors per month that we see. Large metadata. And so what is metadata? Metadata is a JSON serialized description of all fields in all tables, in all extensions, and for all companies that you are replicating in this particular run. And Azure Data Factory has a limitation for this text description to be less than 4 megabytes. So it's not very much. So if you try to migrate to many companies, you might get an error message. And the error message is coming directly from Azure Data Factory, so it's maybe not easily understandable. So one could be the lookup activity result exceeded the limitation, or the user payload is too large. It's during the runtime of Azure Data Factory, and you see them directly. We don't have a chance to intercept them and change the wording there. So yeah, if you see that you're probably trying to migrate too many companies at once. So we suggest that you kind of reduce the number of companies for migration. You can do it on Cloud Migration Management page. There is an action there to select the companies. So select fewer companies, run the migration, then select the next batch. That would be much more stable and probably faster at the end than trying to migrate a lot of companies at once. Right. Sometimes you have a lot of extensions installed in your tenant already in the cloud, but you don't have data for these extensions in your on-premise database. So it's not harmful as such, but why to do that? It also contributes to the large metadata thing. So we recommend that you uninstall unnecessary extensions from the cloud prior to cloud migration and then install them back as you start working with them. Right. And finally, you can, for your own extensions, you can exclude some of the tables from cloud migration by changing the attribute on the table, on the AL table, replicate data to false. Then the next kind of type of errors is when you're trying to migrate large data. And that could happen if you can get it in two different paths. So when there is a bulk copy, many small tables go in as one bulk, right? In this case, what we see most often, out-of-memory exception. This out-of-memory in the Azure Data Factory infrastructure. It's not the Business Central infrastructure, so we don't have any control on that. But yeah, our task failed out of memory. So what we say, what we see is that usually it happens when tenant media table is going through the bulk and it contains some large images. So it's like it's a very big value in a single field that does it. These images they are not compressible. So if you see out of memory exception like that, so we recommend you a workaround, a hack. So you can find a stored procedure that was installed in your on-premise database. It's called isFullCopy stored procedure, and add a block like that. That would redirect tenant media to be copied one-to-one to the cloud, and hopefully you will avoid out-of-memory exception. If you still get it, then just create a support ticket and we will try to help you out. Another large data could happen when it's table-to-table full copy, but the error message would be different. So you see the specified row delimiter is incorrect. This is happening when the Azure Data Factory cannot read the blob storage, the temporary blob storage. So the workaround is the opposite. Try to see which table failed, because it's one-to-one, so you will see the name of the table, and try to redirect it into the bulk. So hopefully it is compressible, so it might succeed. We reported both of these errors to Azure Data Factory, so maybe at some point they'll prioritize the fixes and we won't see it anymore. But today, this is what we face. Right, so the next, okay, some performance tips, something of that we already talked about. So for your on-premise infrastructure, the most important is the machine with the integration runtime. They have specified their own system requirements that we have to honor. Then if your source is Azure SQL, then you can monitor the CPU and memory utilization in the Azure portal, and you should upscale your database if you see high consumption during the cloud migration process. Then what Roman already mentioned, we have update statistic and reorganize indexes for the source database. We recommend to do that before you set up your database for cloud migration, just once. And then use a dedicated SQL server. So don't use the server that is already busy with some other production, activities, but have a server that is only doing cloud migration. Then it will be faster. Yeah, and universal, reduce the number of companies set up for cloud migration. So what we see as an optimal size is about 10, 15 companies. It could be more. It depends on your data and depends on how many objects you have, how many extensions. But try and see what works for you. And one topic that I wanted to talk more, so when you replicate data, we do some default mapping. So normally you don't think about it, but if you have tables with the same names, both in the on-premise and in the cloud, then we just copy them. But we copy them because the SQL names match. So we look at the SQL names, and that usually the company name, the table name, and the extension ID. So if there is a full match, the data is copied, apart from the extra fields, as Nikola just mentioned. So if you edit some fields that are in the on-premise, but they're not in the cloud, we will just silently ignore them. Nothing happens, no errors, no warnings, but they're just not there. So another case, if you have a table in the cloud, but there is no merchant table in the on-premise database. In this case, we replicate the data for all the other tables, but for this table, you'll see a warning like this, that the table doesn't exist in the local installation. So in most cases, it's safe to ignore it, but just make sure that this is expected, that this is what you wanted and you didn't miss this table just for some reason. Right. And if you have different tables, for example, if you have installed absorption extension and you were forced to use 3 letters prefix, but you have data for it in the on-premise, it's just the table name is different, you still can migrate. So in the cloud migration management table, we have an action called table mapping, and there, if you use it, you will be, there is a drop down to choose the extension and the table, and you just type the table name in the on-premise. That should be a matching table, and we respect these mappings during the next migration run. We will take the data and move it to a table with a different name. Move all the fields that are compatible and that have the same names in both tables. So that was it for the replication process, and now Nikola is going to talk what's happened next after you replicated data.
All right, thanks. So for the last step, it's going to be the data upgrade, and I'm going to show to you 2 improvements that we did to the existing process. The first improvement is that we are leveraging the upgrade logic for if you're cloud migrating from previous versions. To explain this one in a little bit more details, for version 20, when we have written the upgrade code that is specific for version 20, we needed to take the changes and to adapt them so we can use them for the cloud migration. And the reason why we need to do this is because we are unable to invoke the upgrade code units. And as you know, the change is needed because you cannot access obsolete removed fields from non-upgrade scope. Now, some of the partners that have also written the upgrade code that would like to use it would essentially need to do the same change, take it and adapt it so it serves the cloud migration. And then the problem is when the upgrade 21 comes, we need to do the same operations, both you and us. And essentially, we should not be doing this because we should be able to reuse the upgrade code that we have written, and we should be able to remove this extra code and extra upgrade logic that we did. So this is the first improvement, because we are triggering the full upgrade code, all apps are going to be included, and you will have a single upgrade logic. The next benefit is that we are going to move the tenant to the status of upgrading, which means that hotfixes are not going to interrupt the upgrade. Also, it is going to be a single session, which means you will get a more stable upgrade. Also, you're going to get all of the reporting and telemetry that we have automatically included. And in case the upgrade fails, you'll get an automatic pit restore. To show you the flow in action, so if you go to the cloud migration page and you invoke run upgrade now, we are going to warn you that you're going to lose the access to the environment because upgrade will start, and that you can track the status in the admin center. So if you say yes, you will get the message that the upgrade was scheduled. And now you can go to the admin center, and you will see that the status has been flipped to updating. If you go to the operations tab, you will see that we are logging the history, and you will see that the upgrade operation is running. If you try to access the environment, you will get, sorry, you cannot access it. We are running upgrades. And the main benefit of this one is, as I said, no hotfixes will be running. And upgrade needs to be this only session that is running on the server. Because if you are using the system, you may incidentally cause locks and cause errors during the upgrade process. Now, if you go back to the admin center and you refresh, approximately after 3 minutes, the status will flip to active. And then if you go back to the Business Central, you're going to, and back to the cloud migration page. The status is going to be flipped to completed. You will see it in a second. And now you're able to go live after this step. Now, in case the upgrade fails, then in this state, you can go back to the operations tab and you'll see that the operation has failed. You'll get a full stack trace. We are looking into providing you with a nice error message as well. So you can see why did it fail, and you can go back to the Business Central. You'll see that the tenant is operational because we have restored it as point in time. And here you will see that upgrade is pending because it was restored to before we ran the upgrade. So now you can fix the errors, replicate additional data, or try to run the upgrade again. So with this new flow, you're also getting an automatic point-in-time restore. The good news as well is that because we are just rolling this one out, we are still supporting the old upgrade flow. So if you took any dependencies to how the system used to work in the past, it is still possible to trigger the old engine. We can programmatically enable the old upgrade path if your solution is affected by this. Then for the last topic, we did some faster upgrade, and faster and upgrade are usually not the words that you can hear together, right? Usually it is much slower. So for this one, we got the data transfer feature. And unfortunately, I will not be able to talk about it much. I will just briefly cover it. The problem is that most of our long-running upgrade is actually being caused because we are moving obsolete removed fields onto the new fields. And we are doing it in an inefficient way by using the loopy solution, where you are looping over the entries and modifying them. The problem with this one is that it is rather slow. So if you want to update 1 million entries, it's going to take anywhere between 2 hours or 24 hours and more. The reason why is it fluctuating so much is because it depends on how strong is the SQL server, how many table extensions you have, and how many subscribers you have to the on-modify event. So it can be 2, 24 hours, or even more. Now, with data transfer features, we have a much more efficient way of doing this. So instead of doing the AR loop, you would say which table is being mapped to which table. You can add source filters. You can add join statements. You can map fields one to another. And when you call copy fields, we are actually going to invoke a SQL query. And we are not going to raise any events. So it is going to be very fast. To give you the comparison numbers, with data transfer, 1 to million entries is approximately taking 2 to 5 minutes. So with this feature, now we are able to update the large tables like customer ledger entries. Yep. Now, it has some limitations because it's a very powerful feature. We can only use it in upgrade scope to initialize the new fields. So the only usage we can use it for is to move the obsolete removed fields onto the new field, because otherwise it would be a breaking change if we do not raise the events. And since it is a powerful feature, currently it's marked as target on-prem, which means that you will unfortunately not be able to use it for SaaS solution, but you can use it for your own on-prem upgrade if you want to make it faster. Now, with every new release, we are getting questions, how many long-running methods have introduced? And I'm happy to say that for this release, we have shrunk the number of long-running methods by 11 because we use this new data transfer feature to optimize the long-running upgrade that we historically know that it has existed. So hopefully the journey to the cloud is going to look like this. It should take much less time to upgrade the on-prem. And because we are reusing the same engine, it should take much less time to also migrate to SaaS. Since we are reusing the engine, we get all of the benefits that we usually get. And I hope that the ultimate test basically is going to be done by you guys. So we are looking forward to your feedback, but we believe that the upgrade to 21, it's going to be faster than the upgrade to version 20. So with this, I hope that we have fixed the long-running upgrade problem. And for the end, we have the API for managing the cloud migrations end-to-end. So this is very useful if you're doing many cloud migrations or if you want to move many companies, like 50 or something like that. you can basically, the entire flow that you have seen today, you can automate it through the APIs. You can do the setup, company management, and then you can manage the cloud migration by doing it. On the BC Tech GitHub, you have the example of all of the APIs. You can try it out. And in case of any issues, if you would like to provide us feedback, we recommend that you join us on the BC Cloud Migration Yammer. You can see that we have 870 partners here. Partners are also providing with a lot of interesting information and helping others. So please join us on Yammer. And with this, we are ending the presentation. We are just out of time. So if you have any questions, I would invite you to come down and ask us a question, and then we can discuss it. Otherwise, you can find us around, and we can talk about any topic. Thank you.